For 5 years, Samantha and I had what I thought was a happy marriage. We met through mutual friends, and from the moment we started dating, it felt like everything fell into place. We got married 2 years later, bought a house in the suburbs, and settled into a life that seemed stable, almost picturesque. I trusted her completely. But looking back, I realize how blind I was to the signs that everything wasn't as perfect as I believed. The changes started small. Samantha suddenly became more invested in her appearance. New clothes, fancier perfumes, hours spent at the gym. When I asked her about it, she'd laugh it off. "Just trying to keep things fresh," she'd say. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, I appreciated her efforts, and I thought she was doing it for both of us. But then there was her phone. Samantha used to be casual about leaving it around the house, sometimes forgetting it entirely when we went out. But in the last 6 months, it became a constant companion. She'd sit on the couch, smiling at messages she never shared, her fingers flying across the screen. If I glanced over, she'd lock the phone and flip it face down on the table. "What's so funny?" I'd ask, trying to sound casual. "Oh, just work stuff," she'd reply, her tone breezy. "You wouldn't get it." Her dismissiveness gnawed at me. Work used to be something we shared, trading stories about our days over dinner. Now it was a topic she avoided entirely. Then came the late nights. Samantha worked in marketing, a demanding job, but she never had to stay late so often before. What used to be occasional became routine. "I have to finish this campaign," she'd say, grabbing her coat and keys. "Don't wait up for me." At first, I believed her. I had no reason not to. But the excuses started piling up: meetings that ran late, last-minute projects, sudden weekend work trips. Each one felt plausible on its own, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to see. The worst part was how distant she became. Samantha was always quick to share her thoughts, whether it was about her favorite TV show or a funny story from work. But lately, she seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. When I asked her about it, she'd smile and say, "You're imagining things, Jake. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. One Friday night, Samantha came home later than usual. She kissed me on the cheek, her smile strained, and dropped her purse on the counter. "Sorry, it was a crazy day," she said, running a hand through her hair. "Another one?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "You wouldn't believe the deadlines they're throwing at us," she said, avoiding my gaze. As she walked past me, I caught a faint whiff of cologne, one that wasn't mine. "What's that smell?" I asked, my tone light but curious. She froze for a split second before laughing. "Oh, one of the guys spilled coffee on me today. I must have brushed up against him while he was cleaning it up." Her explanation seemed reasonable, but something about the way she avoided eye contact made my stomach twist. I told myself not to overreact, that it was probably nothing. But that night, as I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Samantha's behavior became harder to ignore after that Friday night. She had always been social, but lately, she seemed distracted and restless, like being at home with me wasn't enough anymore. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, and her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, smirked, and quickly flipped it face down. It wasn't unusual. Samantha was always getting work messages, but something about her reaction made my chest tighten. "What's so funny?" I asked casually, trying to mask my curiosity. "Nothing," she replied with a light laugh. "Just some dumb office jokes. You wouldn't care." Normally, I wouldn't have pressed, but the way she locked the phone felt deliberate, almost defensive. It was a small moment, but it planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. Things escalated when she mentioned a weekend work retreat. "It's at this great hotel downtown," she said, her tone overly enthusiastic. "We're doing team-building stuff, presentations, brainstorming sessions, the whole package." "That sounds intense," I replied, forcing a smile. "It'll be good for my career," she added quickly, as if she needed to justify her excitement. Her enthusiasm struck me as odd. Samantha hated work trips, always complaining about the long hours and forced interactions. But this time, she seemed thrilled. "Do you need a ride there?" I offered, trying to sound supportive. "No, it's fine. One of the girls from work is picking me up," she said without hesitation. Her response felt too practiced, too ready. That weekend, as she packed her suitcase, I couldn't shake the growing unease. She kissed me goodbye, her smile bright but shallow, and promised to text when she got to the hotel. "Don't stay up too late worrying about me," she joked. But worry was all I could do. That night, I found myself staring at her laptop. It was still logged into her email, and though I hesitated for a moment, the urge to know the truth overpowered me. Her inbox was mostly work-related, but one email caught my eye, a reservation confirmation for the downtown hotel. It wasn't under her name. It was reserved for someone named Ryan D. Finding that reservation email felt like a gut punch. My mind raced with questions. Who was Ryan? Why was his name on the reservation? Was this the reason Samantha had been acting so distant? I stared at the email for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of it. Part of me wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Ryan really was a coworker, and the reservation was for a shared block of rooms for the work retreat. But deep down, I knew better. The excuses didn't hold up anymore. The next morning, I woke up determined to get answers. I couldn't sit around and wait for Samantha to come home with some half-baked story about team-building sessions. If I wanted the truth, I had to find it myself. I drove to the hotel downtown, parking a block away to avoid being noticed. My hands were sweating as I sat in the car, staring at the entrance. It felt ridiculous, stalking my own wife like some kind of detective, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. For an hour, I watched people come and go, scanning the crowd for any sign of Samantha. Just as I was starting to question what I was doing, I saw her. She stepped out of the lobby, laughing at something the man beside her had said. My heart sank. It was him, Ryan. They didn't look like co-workers. She wasn't carrying a laptop bag or notes for a presentation. Instead, she had her arm linked with his, her body language relaxed and intimate. He leaned in close as they talked, and she smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen in years. I sat frozen in the car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. There it was. The truth. Unavoidable, undeniable. I wanted to storm out of the car, march up to them, and demand an explanation. But I stopped myself. Confronting her now would only give her a chance to spin the story, to twist the blame onto me like she always did. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures. I hated myself for it, but I knew I'd need proof. If this was the end of our marriage, I wasn't going to walk away without the truth in my hands. When Samantha came home the next evening, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, dropped her suitcase by the door, and flopped onto the couch. "Ugh, I'm exhausted," she said. That retreat was nonstop. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. How could she lie so easily? "Did you have fun?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She smiled faintly. "As much fun as you can have at a work thing. It was productive, though." Her lies made my stomach churn, but I kept my composure. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not without a plan. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I knew the truth now, but I wasn't sure what to do with it. Part of me wanted to end things immediately, to kick her out and file for divorce. But another part of me wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, to know what it felt like to lose everything. I decided I wouldn't act on impulse. If Samantha thought she could manipulate me, she was wrong. I'd bide my time, gather more evidence, and make sure that when I confronted her, there would be no escape. This wasn't just about ending our marriage, it was about making her understand the damage she'd done. The days that followed were excruciating. Every time Samantha smiled at me, every time she casually scrolled through her phone or kissed me goodbye in the morning, it felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't look at her without replaying the moment I saw her with Ryan outside the hotel. But I knew I had to play my part. If I tipped her off, she'd try to cover her tracks. So I acted normal, or at least as normal as I could manage. I went to work, made dinner, and even asked her about her day like nothing had changed. One night she was on her phone again, laughing softly at a message. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Oh, just a group chat from work," she said without looking up. I nodded, pretending to lose interest. But the moment she left the room, I grabbed her phone off the coffee table. It was locked, of course. Same passcode as always. When I opened it, my suspicions were confirmed. There was a message from Ryan, short but damning. "Last weekend was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." My stomach dropped. Samantha hadn't even bothered to delete it. Did she think I'd never look? Or was she so confident I wouldn't suspect her? I locked the phone and placed it back exactly where I'd found it. I didn't need to read more. That single message was enough to tell me everything I needed to know. Over the next few days, I started piecing together the puzzle. Samantha's work schedule suddenly made sense. Every late night, every weekend trip, every vague excuse about team-building retreats. It had all been an elaborate lie to cover up her affair. I couldn't stop myself from imagining them together. Every time I pictured her smiling at Ryan the way she used to smile at me, it felt like my chest was being crushed. But alongside the pain was something else, anger. Not the explosive, fiery kind, but a cold, calculated fury. I didn't just want to end things, I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. The first step was to gather more evidence. I knew she'd try to twist the narrative if I confronted her without proof, so I started paying closer attention to her habits. One evening, she mentioned another work trip coming up. "Another one?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She shrugged. "What can I say? It's a busy time of year." Her nonchalance made my blood boil, but I smiled and nodded. "Makes sense. Do you need me to help with anything?" "No, I've got it," she said, waving me off. That was all I needed to hear. When the weekend came, I told her I had a last-minute work meeting and left the house early. But instead of going to the office, I drove to the same hotel where I'd seen her with Ryan. This time, I didn't wait outside. I went straight to the front desk and showed them the email I'd found on her laptop. "I'm looking for this reservation," I said. "It's under Ryan D." The woman at the desk hesitated, glancing between me and the computer. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out guest information." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "I'm his coworker, and I think he might have made a mistake with the booking. I just need to confirm he's here." It was a gamble, but it worked. She nodded and checked the system. "Yes, he checked in earlier today," she said. I thanked her and walked away, my heart pounding. Now I had everything I needed. Samantha's lies, Ryan's messages, and the hotel reservation, they all painted a clear picture. That night, when she came home, she acted as if nothing was wrong. She kissed me on the cheek, told me she was exhausted, and headed straight for the shower. As I watched her disappear down the hallway, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was it. The beginning of the end. When Samantha came home that night, I was ready. I'd spent hours piecing everything together, organizing every bit of proof I'd gathered, the messages, the hotel reservation, the pictures of her and Ryan outside the cafe. My chest felt tight with a mix of anger and anticipation, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. It was going to be calculated. She walked through the door looking as radiant as ever, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly tousled. It made me sick to think she'd just been with him. "Long day?" I asked, my voice even. "Ugh, you have no idea," she said, setting her purse down and slipping off her heels. "I'm starving. Did you eat yet?" "Not yet," I said, standing up. "We need to talk first." Her expression shifted slightly, but she covered it quickly with a smile. "Talk? About what?" "About Ryan," I said, locking eyes with her. For a moment she froze. It was brief, so brief that someone who didn't know her as well as I did might have missed it, but it was enough. "Ryan?" she said, laughing nervously. "What are you talking about?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked to the counter where I'd placed my laptop and opened the folder containing all the evidence I'd gathered. "Don't play dumb, Samantha," I said, my voice cold. "I know everything." Her face went pale as I showed her the photos I'd taken of her and Ryan outside the hotel, the email confirming the reservation, and the messages I'd found on her phone. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaky. "This is proof," I said, stepping closer. "Proof that you've been lying to me for months. That you've been sneaking around with him while pretending everything is fine between us." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Jake, it's not what it looks like. I swear." "Don't insult my intelligence," I snapped, cutting her off. "I saw you with him, Samantha. I saw the way you looked at him. Don't you dare stand there and tell me this is all some big misunderstanding." Her tears started falling, but they didn't move me. For once, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her emotions. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, I messed up. But it didn't mean anything, Jake. It was just a mistake." I laughed bitterly. "A mistake? Is that what you call months of lies and betrayal? How long, Samantha? How long have you been cheating on me?" She hesitated, wiping her tears. "It's not like that. I was just... I don't know. I felt lonely, Jake. You've been so distant lately, and Ryan, he made me feel wanted." Her words hit me like a slap. The audacity of her trying to pin this on me after everything she'd done made my blood boil. "You felt lonely?" I said, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea how hard I've been working to make this marriage work? To give you everything you've ever wanted? And this is how you repay me?" She didn't respond, her silence confirming everything I needed to know. I walked to the bedroom and grabbed the suitcase I'd packed earlier in the day. "Where are you going?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Somewhere you're not," I said, brushing past her. "Jake, wait, please," she begged, grabbing my arm. "We can fix this. I'll end things with Ryan. I'll do whatever it takes." I yanked my arm free, glaring at her. "You already ended this, Samantha. The moment you decided he was worth more than our marriage." Without another word, I walked out the door, slamming it behind me. When I left the house that night, it felt like the weight of the past 5 years was pressing down on me. I drove aimlessly for a while, unsure where to go or what to do next. Part of me wanted to call Chris, my best friend, but I wasn't ready to explain everything yet. I wasn't ready to admit how badly I'd failed to see the betrayal unfolding right in front of me. I ended up checking into a small hotel on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a basic room with a bed and a view of the parking lot, but it was quiet. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. The next morning, I woke up early and called a lawyer. I wasn't interested in waiting around to see if Samantha would suddenly come to her senses. I needed to protect myself, both emotionally and financially. "Jake, I'm sorry to hear about your situation," the lawyer said after I explained everything. "But it sounds like you're making the right decision. The sooner we get started, the better." We set up an appointment for later that week, and just like that, the wheels were in motion. I spent the next few days bouncing between work and the hotel, trying to keep my mind occupied. Samantha called and texted constantly, alternating between apologies and excuses. "Jake, please, I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. You can't just throw away everything we've built over one stupid fling. I'll go to counseling. I'll cut him off. Just talk to me, please." I ignored every message. I didn't trust myself to respond without saying something I'd regret. One evening, as I sat in the hotel room scrolling through my phone, a message from Chris popped up. "Hey man, everything okay? Haven't heard from you in a bit." I hesitated for a moment before replying. "Not really. Can we grab a beer tomorrow?" "Of course," he replied almost instantly. "Name the place." The next night, I met Chris at our favorite dive bar. As soon as I walked in, he could tell something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, sliding a beer across the table. I took a deep breath. "Samantha cheated on me." His eyes widened. "Are you serious? When? How did you find out?" I spent the next hour telling him everything, the late nights, the lies, the hotel, Ryan. By the time I finished, Chris looked like he wanted to punch a wall. "She's unbelievable," he said, shaking his head. "You didn't deserve that, man. You've always been good to her." "Apparently, that wasn't enough," I said bitterly, taking a long sip of my beer. "Forget her," Chris said firmly. "You're better off without her. And if you need anything, help moving, someone to talk to, whatever, you know I'm here." His support was a small comfort, but it reminded me that I wasn't completely alone. That night, as I drove back to the hotel, I thought about what Chris had said. Forget her. It sounded simple, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Samantha had been such a huge part of my life for so long that the idea of moving on felt overwhelming. But as I pulled into the parking lot and sat in the car, staring at the dimly lit hotel sign, I realized I didn't have a choice. This was my life now, and it was up to me to rebuild it. The first thing I did the next morning was start clearing Samantha out of my life. It wasn't just about the divorce. It was about reclaiming my space, my mind, and my sanity. I went back to the house while I knew she'd be at work. Walking through the front door felt strange, like I was stepping into someone else's life. The place was too quiet, the energy heavy with all the lies and betrayals that had unfolded within its walls. I grabbed a few things I'd left behind, clothes, my laptop, and a box of old mementos, and shoved them into my car. As I walked through the living room, my eyes landed on the wedding photo hanging on the wall. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at it. The image felt like a cruel joke now, a reminder of everything I thought we had. Without thinking, I pulled it off the wall and tossed it into the box. The next stop was the bank. Samantha and I had shared finances for years, but I wasn't about to let her access the money I'd worked so hard for. I sat down with a banker and set up a new account under my name only, transferring everything that was legally mine. "Do you want to close the joint account entirely?" the banker asked. "No," I said after a moment. "Leave it open for now." I didn't want to give her any reason to suspect what was coming. Later that day, I met with my lawyer. Karen was sharp, no nonsense, and exactly the kind of person I needed on my side. "Jake, I've seen cases like this before," she said as I explained the situation. "The good news is you don't have kids, which makes things much simpler. The bad news is that infidelity can get messy, especially if she tries to deny it." "She won't be able to deny it," I said, pulling out the photos and emails I'd saved. Karen flipped through the evidence, nodding. "This will help. It's clear and undeniable. With this, we should be able to negotiate a favorable settlement." "Good," I said firmly. "I don't want anything drawn out. I just want it done." She smiled. "We'll make it happen." That evening, I sat in the hotel room, staring at my phone. Samantha had been texting me nonstop since the confrontation, alternating between apologies and thinly veiled attempts to guilt me into coming back. "Jake, we can fix this. I know I messed up, but you can't just walk away from 5 years of marriage. Are you really going to throw everything away over one mistake? You're not perfect either, Jake. Don't act like you've never let me down." Her words infuriated me. Even now, she refused to take full responsibility for what she'd done. She wanted to shift the blame, to paint herself as a victim in a situation she had created. I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked her number. The next few days were strangely quiet. Without her constant messages, I felt a sense of relief, like I could finally breathe again. I started settling into a new routine: work during the day, gym in the evening, and long walks to clear my head. Chris checked in regularly, dragging me out for drinks or dinner when he thought I needed the distraction. "You seem better," he said one night as we sat at the bar. "I'm getting there," I replied. "You're doing the right thing," he said firmly. "Don't let her back in, no matter what she says." "I won't," I promised. And for the first time, I actually believed it. By the end of the week, the house was no longer a shared space. I'd removed everything of mine that mattered: clothes, electronics, personal keepsakes, and left behind the things I no longer cared about. The house was just a shell now, holding memories I was ready to leave behind. Samantha must have sensed the shift, because her texts and emails escalated. Blocking her number had cut off one line of communication, but she found other ways to reach me. Every morning, I woke up to emails begging for another chance, each one more desperate than the last. "Jake, please. We need to talk. You're being so cold, and it's killing me. I can't believe you're throwing away everything we've built. I love you, doesn't that mean anything?" I deleted them without responding, determined not to let her back into my head. But she wasn't done yet. One afternoon, as I was heading out to meet Chris for a late lunch, my phone buzzed with a notification from the security camera at the house. I frowned, opening the app to check the feed. There she was, standing on the porch, pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her frustration was obvious. She kept gesturing wildly, as if trying to explain something to someone. Then she stopped, her eyes darting to the camera, and I knew she'd seen it. A moment later, my phone buzzed again. It was a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. When I met Chris at the restaurant, I told him what had happened. "She showed up at the house," I said, shaking my head. "Did you talk to her?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I didn't even answer the door. She doesn't deserve that from me." Chris nodded approvingly. "Good. She's trying to manipulate you. Don't give her the chance." "Trust me, I won't," I said, though the encounter had left me unsettled. The next day, she tried again. This time, she left a voicemail. "Jake, please, just hear me out," her voice said, trembling with emotion. "I know I hurt you, but I can't lose you. You're everything to me. Please don't let this be the end." I listened to the message twice, wondering if there was any sincerity behind her words. But then I remembered the months of lies, the way she'd laughed with Ryan outside that hotel, and the empty promises she'd made when I confronted her. No. She wasn't sorry. She was scared of losing the comfortable life she'd taken for granted. I deleted the message without a second thought. Karen called later that week with an update. "We've submitted the paperwork," she said. "Now it's just a matter of waiting for her response. If she contests anything, we'll deal with it, but with the evidence you've provided, she doesn't have much leverage." "Good," I said, relieved. "I want this over with as soon as possible." "It will be," she assured me. "You're doing the right thing, Jake. Don't let her guilt you into thinking otherwise." "I won't," I promised. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my hotel room, watching the sun dip below the horizon. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. The storm was finally passing, and I was starting to see a glimpse of what my life could be without her. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. In the days that followed, Samantha's attempts to reach me slowed but didn't stop entirely. She was persistent, sending sporadic emails and leaving voicemails from different numbers. Each message was a mix of apologies, guilt-tripping, and thinly veiled accusations. "Jake, I know I made mistakes, but you're not blameless either. How can you give up on us so easily? We've been through so much together. Don't throw away 5 years of marriage over one mistake. Everyone deserves a second chance." Her words used to sting, but now they felt hollow. I'd replayed her betrayal in my mind too many times to be swayed by her excuses. Every time she reached out, it only reinforced my decision to walk away for good. One afternoon, I decided to clear my head by hiking the trail Chris and I used to frequent. The crisp air and quiet solitude were a welcome change from the chaos of the last few weeks. As I reached the summit, the view stretched out before me, a patchwork of trees and valleys bathed in golden sunlight. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. The life I'd shared with Samantha wasn't coming back, and that was okay. It wasn't worth saving. I couldn't change the past, but I could control what came next. When I got back to the hotel, I found an email from Karen waiting in my inbox. Jake, we've received her response. She's not contesting the divorce, but she is pushing for a larger portion of the shared assets. Call me when you can to discuss next steps. I clenched my jaw, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. After everything she'd done, Samantha still had the audacity to try and take more than she deserved. I called Karen immediately. She's asking for the house, Karen said bluntly. No, I replied without hesitation. She can have it. Karen chuckled. I didn't think you'd agree. Don't worry, we'll push back. With the evidence we have, she doesn't have much ground to stand on. But be prepared for her to fight this. Let her, I said firmly. She won't win. That night, as I sat on the edge of the bed, I thought about what the house represented. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the life we'd built together, the life she'd shattered with her lies. I didn't want to keep the house out of spite or nostalgia. I wanted to keep it because it was mine as much as hers, and I refused to let her take more from me than she already had. Over the next week, Karen and I worked through the details of the settlement. Samantha's demands grew more unreasonable with each exchange, but Karen remained steadfast. She's stalling, Karen said after yet another round of back and forth. She thinks dragging this out will wear you down. It won't, I said simply. And it didn't. When the final settlement was drafted, Samantha ended up with far less than she'd hoped for. She tried to fight it, of course, but the evidence of her affair left her with little leverage. In the end, she walked away with her personal belongings and a fraction of the shared assets. The house? It stayed with me. After the paperwork was signed, Karen called to congratulate me. It's over, Jake, she said. You're officially free. Thanks, Karen, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. You've been through a lot, she added. Take some time for yourself. You've earned it. And for the first time in months, I felt like I truly had. The day the divorce was finalized, I woke up feeling different. It wasn't the dramatic sense of relief I'd imagined, but a quiet, steady calm. The worst was behind me. I spent the morning tidying up the house, not because it was messy, but because I needed to reclaim it. Every corner of the place carried traces of Samantha, her favorite chair in the living room, the mug she used for her tea, the perfume lingering in the bedroom. One by one, I removed those reminders. I boxed up the items she'd left behind and dropped them off at a donation center, leaving only what truly felt like mine. Chris came over that evening with a six-pack and his usual blunt humor. Officially a free man, huh? He said, handing me a beer. Officially, I replied, clinking my bottle against his. He took a swig and grinned. So, what's next? You going to sell this place? Start fresh somewhere new? I thought about it, I admitted, leaning back on the couch. But I don't think running away is the answer. I've spent too much time letting other people dictate my life. This house? It's mine now. I'm staying. Good, he said. You've earned it. In the weeks that followed, I began to settle into a new routine. The house felt lighter without Samantha's presence, like the air had finally cleared. I started going to the gym regularly, not just to stay busy but to feel stronger, both physically and mentally. On weekends, I threw myself into small home improvement projects, fixing things I'd always put off. It was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected, turning the house into something that reflected me, not us. Every now and then, Samantha crossed my mind. It wasn't out of longing or regret, but a sense of curiosity. What was she doing now? Was she with Ryan? Did she ever think about the damage she'd caused? But those thoughts never lingered. The pain she'd inflicted had dulled, replaced by a sense of acceptance. I didn't need her apologies or explanations anymore. The chapter was closed. One Saturday, I found myself driving aimlessly, enjoying the freedom of the open road. I ended up at a trailhead Chris and I used to hike. The climb was steep, but the view at the summit was worth every step. As I stood there, looking out over the sprawling valley below, I felt something I hadn't in months: peace. For so long, I'd been stuck in survival mode, focused on just getting through each day. But now, I could see the horizon again, new possibilities, new opportunities, and a life that was entirely mine. I smiled, the first genuine smile in what felt like forever. The betrayal that had once defined me was now just a memory, a lesson learned the hard way. And while it had left its scars, those scars were proof that I'd endured, that I'd survived, and that I was stronger for it. With the divorce behind me and the house finally feeling like my own, I started focusing on rebuilding my life. It wasn't about filling the void Samantha left behind, it was about rediscovering who I was without her. I started small. The gym became a routine, and every week I added a little more to my workouts. It wasn't just about physical strength, it was about proving to myself that I could commit to something and see it through. I also began tackling hobbies I'd put off during the marriage. Photography had always fascinated me, but I'd never taken the time to explore it. One afternoon, I bought a decent camera and spent the evening wandering around the city, snapping pictures of anything that caught my eye. At first, it felt strange to have so much free time. I'd spent years centering my life around Samantha, making compromises and sacrifices to accommodate her needs. Now, for the first time in forever, my time was mine. Chris was a constant source of support during this period. He pushed me to step out of my comfort zone, suggesting new restaurants, concerts, and weekend trips. "Life doesn't stop just because she's gone," he said one night over drinks. "You've got to start living it for yourself." I took his advice to heart. One weekend, we hiked a new trail, one that was longer and more challenging than anything we'd done before. As we reached the summit, I felt a surge of pride, not just for completing the hike, but for how far I'd come in the weeks since the divorce. "You're looking good, man," Chris said, clapping me on the back. "Lighter. Like you finally let go of all that baggage." "Feels like it," I said, smiling. Every now and then, Samantha would pop into my head, not the woman she became, but the person I thought she was when we first met. The one who made me laugh until my sides hurt, who knew all my favorite songs, who swore we'd take on the world together. But that version of her didn't exist anymore, and I was finally okay with that. One afternoon, I was cleaning out the attic when I came across a box of old keepsakes. Inside was our wedding album, tucked beneath layers of dust. For a moment, I debated whether to open it or toss it into the trash. Eventually, curiosity won. Flipping through the pages was like looking at a different life. The smiles, the laughter, the promises we made, it all felt so distant, like it belonged to someone else. I didn't feel anger or sadness. Just a quiet acceptance that those moments were part of my story, but they didn't define me anymore. I closed the album and placed it back in the box, sealing it shut. It wasn't something I needed to revisit again. The days turned into weeks, and I found myself looking forward to the future in a way I hadn't before. I wasn't just surviving, I was living, exploring, and rediscovering who I was. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Life after the divorce settled into a rhythm that I hadn't expected. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was thriving in small, steady ways. The pain that once consumed me felt like a distant memory, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild my life on my own terms. One morning, I got a call from Karen. "Jake, you're all set," she said cheerfully. "The final paperwork has been filed. You're officially free and clear." Hearing those words gave me a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also a sense of finality. The chapter I'd been clawing my way through was officially closed. "Thanks, Karen," I said. "For everything. Take care of yourself," she said warmly. "And remember, this is the start of something new." She was right. For the first time in months, I felt like the future wasn't something to dread. It was something to embrace. I threw myself into work, channeling my energy into projects that had been on the back burner for too long. My boss noticed the change, praising my focus and drive. "You've been killing it lately," he said during a meeting. "Keep this up, And we'll be talking about a promotion soon. It felt good to be recognized, but even more than that, it felt good to have something that was mine, independent of the life I'd shared with Samantha. One weekend, Chris and I took a road trip to the coast. The salty breeze, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, it all felt cleansing in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We sat on the beach that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You seem different," Chris said after a while. "Different how?" I asked. "Lighter," he said with a grin. "Like you're finally letting go of all that baggage." "Maybe I am," I said, smiling. "Good," he said, tossing a rock into the waves. "It's about time." As the weeks passed, I started looking ahead instead of back. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. Each session felt like a small victory, a reminder that I was capable of creating something beautiful, even after everything I'd been through. I also started volunteering at a local animal shelter on weekends, walking dogs and helping with adoptions. It was simple, rewarding work that reminded me of the good still left in the world. The house, too, became a reflection of my new life. I painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and added personal touches that made it feel like mine. It wasn't just a place to live anymore, it was a home. Every now and then, I'd think about Samantha. Not in a longing way, but with a sense of detachment. I wondered if she and Ryan were still together, if she'd moved on or regretted her choices. But those thoughts didn't linger. Her chapter in my life was over, and I was finally at peace with that. By the time summer rolled around, I felt like I'd finally stepped into a version of myself that I hadn't seen in years. Life was simpler, quieter, but more fulfilling. I wasn't rushing from one obligation to the next, constantly trying to meet someone else's expectations. I was living for me. One afternoon, I sat in my newly rearranged living room, flipping through some of the photos I'd taken during a recent hike. It was a new hobby, but it had quickly become a passion. Each shot felt like a small story, a moment in time I could preserve and appreciate. I decided to frame a few and hang them in the house. Seeing my work on the walls made the place feel more personal, more like a reflection of who I was becoming. Chris was relentless in his efforts to keep me moving forward. "You've been holed up here long enough," he said one evening, leaning against my kitchen counter. "It's time to get out and meet people." "I meet people," I said defensively. "Yeah, shelter dogs don't count," he shot back with a grin. "Come on, man. You're single now. You've got a clean slate. Use it." I rolled my eyes but knew he had a point. That weekend, Chris dragged me to a barbecue at one of his coworkers' houses. At first, I felt out of place. Everyone seemed to know each other, and I wasn't sure how to fit in. But as the night went on, I found myself relaxing. The conversation flowed, and for the first time in months, I laughed without feeling like I had to force it. At one point, a woman named Sarah struck up a conversation with me. She was warm, easy to talk to, and didn't press for details about my past. "Photography, huh?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "You'll have to show me some of your work sometime." "Maybe," I said, smiling. It wasn't much, just a light exchange, but it reminded me that I wasn't as closed off as I thought. As the weeks went on, I started opening myself up to new experiences. I said yes to invitations I might have declined before, dinners, events, even a weekend kayaking trip Chris planned. Each small step felt like progress, a way of proving to myself that I could move forward without being weighed down by the past. One day, while walking through the city with my camera, I stumbled upon a street market. The air buzzed with energy, vendors shouting about their goods, musicians playing on corners, families weaving through the crowd. I stopped at a booth selling handmade journals and struck up a conversation with the vendor, an older man with kind eyes. "What brings you here?" he asked, gesturing to my camera. "Just exploring," I said. He smiled. "Sometimes the best discoveries come when you're not looking for anything in particular." His words stayed with me as I walked away, a reminder that life didn't always have to be planned or controlled. Sometimes it was enough just to be present and open to what came next. For the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. As summer turned to fall, I noticed a change in myself. It wasn't something dramatic or sudden, but a quiet shift that I felt in the small moments of my day-to-day life. I wasn't defined by my past anymore. I was building something new, something better, one step at a time. The house, once a place full of painful reminders, now felt like home. The walls were lined with photos I'd taken, pieces of art I'd picked out for myself, and furniture I'd rearranged to suit my style. It wasn't just a house Samantha and I had shared, it was mine now, through and through. I began spending more time in the city, wandering through parks and markets, finding inspiration in the ordinary. My photography had evolved, and I'd started sharing some of my work online. The response was more positive than I expected. People commented on how my photos captured emotion, how they told stories in a single frame. It gave me a sense of purpose, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Chris noticed the difference in me too. "You're like a whole new person," he said one night over drinks. "Or maybe I'm just getting back to who I was before," I replied. "Either way, it's good to see you like this," he said. "You've come a long way, man." Hearing those words hit me in a way I didn't expect. For so long, I'd been caught up in surviving the fallout of my marriage that I hadn't realized how far I'd come. One evening, I was sorting through some old boxes in the attic when I came across a journal Samantha had given me early in our relationship. I'd barely written in it over the years, but flipping through the pages brought back memories, both good and bad. For a moment, I considered tossing it out. But instead, I sat down and started writing. It wasn't about her or the past. It was about everything I'd been feeling since the divorce, the anger, the heartbreak, the hope, and the growth. By the time I finished, I felt lighter, like I'd finally let go of something I hadn't even realized I was holding on to. The next day, I visited the animal shelter where I volunteered and spent a few hours walking dogs and helping with adoptions. It was simple, rewarding work that reminded me of the good still left in the world. One of the staff members, a woman named Emily, struck up a conversation with me. "You've been coming here for months now," she said, smiling. "You're one of our most reliable volunteers." "It's been good for me," I admitted. "Well, we're lucky to have you," she said. Her kindness caught me off guard, but it stayed with me. It was a reminder that while my marriage had ended in betrayal, there were still good people out there, people who saw the best in others and chose to give back. As I drove home that evening, I realized how different my life looked from just a few months ago. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. By the time winter arrived, the life I was living felt unrecognizable from the one I'd left behind. The pain of Samantha's betrayal had dulled into a distant memory, replaced by a steady sense of contentment. My days were no longer filled with doubts or what-ifs. Instead, they were shaped by the choices I made for myself, with no one else pulling the strings. One chilly December evening, I found myself back on the trail where I'd hiked so many times after the divorce. The trees were bare now, their branches reaching into the gray sky. The air was sharp and crisp, carrying the promise of snow. As I climbed toward the summit, I thought about everything that had brought me here, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the long nights questioning my worth. It all seemed like a different lifetime, like it had happened to someone else. At the top, I stood quietly, looking out over the valley below. The view was as breathtaking as ever, but this time, it felt different. I wasn't standing there to escape or to find answers. I was standing there because I wanted to, because it was part of the life I'd built for myself. Later that week, I went to the shelter to help with an adoption event. Emily was there, as always, bustling around with her clipboard and chatting with prospective adopters. "Jake," she called out when she saw me. "Can you give me a hand over here?" I walked over, and she handed me a leash. Attached to it was a scrappy little mutt with big, soulful eyes. "This one's a handful," she said with a laugh. "But he's got a lot of love to give." I knelt down to pet the dog, who wagged his tail furiously. For a moment, I thought about how much my life had changed. The old me wouldn't have taken time out of my schedule to do something like this. But now, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. A few days later, I found myself filling out the adoption paperwork for that same scrappy little mutt. I named him Max, and from the moment I brought him home, the house felt less empty. Max had a knack for pulling me out of my head, whether it was demanding a walk or insistingly play tug-of-war with his favorite toy. He was a constant reminder to live in the moment, to let go of the past and embrace the present. One evening, as Max and I lounged on the couch, I scrolled through some of the photos I'd taken over the past few months. They told a story, not just of places I'd been, but of the transformation I'd undergone. I thought about posting some of them online, but then I paused. This journey wasn't for anyone else. It was mine, and that was enough. Months ago, I thought Samantha's betrayal would define me forever. I thought it would break me, that I'd never be able to rebuild after everything I'd lost. But as I sat there, with Max snoring softly beside me and the quiet hum of life filling the room, I realized that wasn't true at all. Her betrayal didn't define me. My response to it did. I wasn't the man who'd been cheated on. I was the man who'd survived, who'd grown stronger, who'd built a life worth living. And that, I decided, was the best revenge of all.